Last Tuesday morning, a 72-year-old man named Robert sat at his kitchen table in Des Moines, Iowa, staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. His daughter had called 3 times, his grandson had texted twice, and Robert hadn't answered a single message. Not because he was angry, not because he was sick, but because he was scared. For nearly 6 months, he had been feeling something he couldn't explain. His energy was gone. His legs felt weak. He found himself forgetting simple things. Some mornings he would walk into a room and completely forget why he went there. At first, he told himself what millions of Americans over 60 tell themselves every day. Well, I guess that's just part of getting older. Then he started sleeping more. Then he stopped going fishing. Then he stopped meeting his buddies for breakfast every Thursday. Little by little, his world got smaller. And the strange part? He thought he was doing everything right, taking every medication exactly as prescribed, never missing a dose, following doctor's orders, being responsible. Then one routine appointment changed everything. His doctor reviewed his medications, looked at his chart, and asked a question Robert had never been asked before. When was the last time someone reviewed whether you still need all of these medications? Robert looked confused. Need them? I've been taking them for years. The doctor nodded. Then he said something Robert still talks about today. The medication that helps you at 55 isn't always the medication your body needs at 72. That sentence stopped him cold, because nobody had ever explained that getting older doesn't just change your body, it changes how your body handles medications. And sometimes the very pills that once protected you can begin creating problems that look exactly like aging itself. My name is Dr. Michael Carter. For more than 3 decades, I've worked with older adults, helping them understand how the body changes after 60, and why some symptoms people blame on aging are actually coming from somewhere completely different. Today, I want to walk you through 7 warning signs that many seniors ignore, not because they're careless, because nobody connected the dots for them. Stay with me until the end, because number 7 is the one that surprises people most. It's also the one I see missed every single week. Before we begin, tell me your age in the comments, and I want you to answer one question honestly. Have you noticed any new symptom in the last year that you assumed was simply getting older? Fatigue, dizziness, brain fog, balance problems? Put it in the comments. You might be helping someone else realize they're not alone. Now let's talk about something nobody likes discussing: the slow theft of energy. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You wake up after 8 hours in bed and still feel tired. You need a nap by noon. You sit down after lunch and suddenly your eyelids feel like they weigh 20 pounds. Many people immediately assume their body is simply wearing out. Sometimes that's true, but not always. I remember a woman named Carol from Ohio, 71 years old, still active, still gardening, still walking every morning. Then one spring, she started feeling exhausted, not sleepy, exhausted. She told her daughter she felt like someone had secretly removed half the batteries from her body. Doctors ran tests, nothing obvious. Her heart looked fine, her blood work looked reasonable. Then, during a medication review, one small detail stood out. A medication she had started 2 years earlier had gradually begun affecting her energy levels. The change had happened so slowly she never connected the dots. That's the dangerous part. When symptoms arrive gradually, the brain normalizes them. You adapt, you adjust, you stop noticing the decline, until one day you realize you're living a completely different life than you were a year ago. And here's the kicker. Many medications can affect energy without causing what people think of as side effects. No flashing warning signs, no dramatic reactions, just a slow reduction in how vibrant you feel. Like somebody quietly turning down a dimmer switch, month after month, year after year. Now, I want you to think about your balance. Not when you're hiking, not when you're exercising, just everyday life. Standing up from a chair, walking to the mailbox, stepping off a curb. Have you noticed yourself becoming more cautious? Maybe holding on to railings a little longer, maybe pausing before standing, maybe feeling slightly unsteady for a second or two. Most people blame age, and yes, age matters, but age is not always the whole story. Several years ago, I met a retired firefighter named Frank, 74. Tough guy, the kind of man who spent his life running toward danger while everyone else ran away. Frank kept insisting he was just slowing down. His wife wasn't convinced. She noticed him grabbing furniture as he walked through the house. Not enough to alarm him, just enough to worry her. After a thorough review, it became clear that one of his medications was lowering his blood pressure more than necessary at certain times of the day. Not enough to make him pass out, just enough to make him unstable. That subtle instability increased his fall risk dramatically. And for adults over 65, falls aren't just inconveniences, they're life-changing events. A broken hip can steal independence in the matter of seconds. That's why dizziness, balance changes, or feeling lightheaded should never be dismissed automatically. Your body is trying to tell you something. Listen. Another warning sign almost nobody talks about is confusion. Not severe confusion, not getting lost in your own neighborhood. I'm talking about little moments. Walking into the kitchen and forgetting why. Struggling to find a word you normally know. Reading the same sentence twice. Forgetting appointments you would never have missed 10 years ago. When these things happen, many people immediately fear dementia, and that's understandable. But here's what I want you to know. Not every memory problem comes from a disease process. Sometimes the brain is simply responding to changes happening elsewhere in the body. Poor sleep, medication interactions, dehydration, blood pressure fluctuations. Even mild side effects can affect concentration and memory. I once worked with a gentleman named Harold, 76 years old, former accountant, sharp as a tack. Then his family noticed he was repeating stories, missing details, losing track of conversations. Everyone feared the worst. Months later, after reviewing several medications and making adjustments with his physician, the difference was remarkable. His family described it perfectly. It's like Dad came back. Think about that. For months, they thought they were losing him. What they were actually seeing was a problem that could be addressed. That doesn't mean every memory problem has a simple explanation, but it does mean you should never assume. Assumptions are dangerous. Questions save people. And that brings me to something even more important, the symptom many seniors never mention because they think it's embarrassing: swelling. Not dramatic swelling, not emergency room swelling, just puffy feet, tighter shoes, sock marks around the ankles, a ring that suddenly feels tighter. Many people shrug it off. It's hot outside. I was on my feet. I drank too much water. Maybe, but swelling is information. Your body is communicating something. Ignoring it doesn't make the message disappear. It only delays understanding it. Robert, the man I mentioned earlier, thought his swollen feet meant heart failure. Another patient thought it meant kidney disease. A third thought she was simply gaining weight. All three were wrong, and all three spent months worrying unnecessarily because nobody explained what they were seeing. The truth is that symptoms often look frightening when you don't understand them. Information removes fear. That's why education matters. That's why conversations matter. And that's why we're only getting started. Because the next warning sign is the one that causes thousands of older adults to quietly withdraw from activities they love without ever realizing why it's happening. Now, there is something else that almost nobody talks about when discussing blood pressure medications with adults over 60. And frankly, this is where things get real, because sometimes the problem is not the medication. Sometimes the problem is that your body is changing in ways you never expected. Let me explain. A few years ago, I met a man named Robert, 73 years old, retired firefighter from Texas, strong guy. The kind of man who spent his entire life taking care of everyone else, never complained, never slowed down, never missed a day of work until retirement. Robert was taking Losartan. His blood pressure looked perfect on paper. Every appointment, every reading, every chart, everything looked great. But something felt off. He started feeling exhausted around lunchtime, not sleepy, not tired, drained, like somebody had quietly unplugged his battery. At first, he blamed age. Then he blamed the Texas heat. Then he blamed retirement boredom. Sound familiar? Because millions of Americans over 60 do exactly the same thing. Something changes, and instead of asking why, they simply tell themselves, well, I guess that's just getting older. But here's the thing. Getting older is real. Blaming everything on age is dangerous. When Robert finally came in, I asked him a simple question. What time do you take your medication? He smiled. Every morning, same time, 6 a.m. Then I asked another question. What time do you feel wiped out? He paused. Usually around noon. That's when we found the answer. His blood pressure wasn't just lowering, it was dipping too low during the middle of the day. Not dangerously low, just low enough to make him feel weak, foggy, and exhausted. One small adjustment, one conversation, and within 2 weeks he felt like himself again. Think about that. For 8 months he believed he was getting old. In reality, he simply needed better timing. That's why I always tell my patients, never assume, never guess, and never decide what a symptom means without asking questions, because your body speaks in clues, and clues matter. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Let's talk about dizziness, because if you're over 60 and taking blood pressure medication, this may be one of the most important sections of today's video. Imagine this. You're sitting on your couch watching television. Maybe it's Sunday football. Maybe it's your favorite Hallmark movie. Maybe you're just relaxing after dinner. You stand up and suddenly, whoa, the room tilts. For a second, it feels like the floor moved. Then it passes. Most people laugh it off. They grab the armrest, wait a few seconds, keep going. But what just happened? Your blood pressure has to adjust every time you change position. When you're younger, that adjustment happens almost instantly. When you're older, especially on blood pressure medication, the response can be slower. Doctors call it orthostatic hypotension. Most people call it feeling dizzy. And here's why it matters. Falls are one of the fastest ways older adults lose independence. Not heart attacks, not strokes, falls. One bad fall, one broken hip, one hospitalization, and life can change overnight. That's why I want you to remember this. If you feel dizzy standing up, do not ignore it. Do not power through it. Do not assume it's normal. Tell your doctor, because the fix may be much simpler than you think. Now let me tell you about Susan, 71, grandmother of 6, living in Ohio. Susan loved gardening. Every spring, her backyard looked like something out of a magazine. Flowers everywhere, color everywhere. One morning, she stood up from pulling weeds. The world spun. She fell backward. Fortunately, she wasn't seriously injured, but the fear stayed. After that day, she stopped gardening, stopped walking alone, stopped doing things she loved, not because she was physically unable, because she was scared. And fear can shrink a life faster than almost anything else. When we reviewed her medications, we discovered something important. She was taking her blood pressure medicine, a water pill, And she wasn't drinking enough fluids. Her blood pressure was dropping when she stood up. A few adjustments later, the dizziness improved, the confidence returned, and the following spring, she was back in her garden. That's why I keep saying this. Symptoms matter, even small ones, especially small ones, because the body rarely starts with a crisis. It starts with whispers. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked at your medication bottle and wondered, will I be taking this forever? Almost every patient asks that question eventually, and it's understandable. Nobody wants to feel dependent on a pill. Nobody wants to imagine taking medication every day for the next 20 years. But the answer is more complicated than most people realize. I've seen patients reduce medications. I've seen patients stay on the same dose for decades. I've seen patients need more. The difference is usually not luck. The difference is what happens between appointments. Let me tell you about Linda, 68, living outside Nashville. When she first came to see me, her blood pressure was running high. Not outrageously high, but high enough that treatment was necessary. She started medication, but she also made 3 changes. Nothing extreme, nothing you'd see in some crazy internet ad. She started walking 20 minutes every morning, cut back on processed foods, and committed to getting better sleep. That's it. No magic, no miracle supplement, no gimmicks. A year later, she had lost weight. Her numbers improved, her energy improved, and we were able to reduce her medication. Notice what I didn't say. I didn't say the medication failed. I didn't say she cured high blood pressure. The medication helped create stability. Her habits helped create improvement. Those 2 things worked together. That's how real health usually happens. Not overnight, not with shortcuts, not with miracle promises. Step by step, day by day. And honestly, that's not flashy, but it works. Now, here's a question nobody asks often enough. What if your medication is working perfectly and you still don't feel good? That happens more than people think, because blood pressure numbers are important, but numbers are not the entire story. You are not a spreadsheet. You are not a chart. You are a human being. I remember a gentleman named Frank, 75 years old, former truck driver from Missouri. His readings looked fantastic. Any doctor would have looked at the chart and said, "Great job, keep doing what you're doing." But Frank didn't feel great. He felt sluggish, disconnected, like he wasn't quite himself. So instead of focusing only on the numbers, we started asking different questions. How is he sleeping? How active was he? How much water was he drinking? How much stress was he carrying? Turns out the biggest issue wasn't his medication at all. It was sleep. He was waking up 5 times a night, month after month, year after year. Once we addressed that problem, everything improved. His energy, his mood, his quality of life. Sometimes the answer is hiding in plain sight. And that's exactly why curiosity matters, because the first explanation is not always the correct one. Now stay with me, because the next section may be the most eye-opening part of this entire discussion. There is one mistake I see seniors make over and over again. Smart people, responsible people, people who genuinely care about their health, and yet this mistake keeps happening. It usually starts like this. They check their blood pressure, the number looks good, so they think, maybe I don't need the medication anymore. And that's where trouble begins. Because here's the reality. The medication may be the reason the number looks good. Imagine wearing glasses. You put on your glasses, suddenly you can see clearly. Then you decide, my vision is fine now. I don't need these anymore. That logic doesn't work, and the same principle often applies to blood pressure medication. A normal reading doesn't automatically mean the underlying condition disappeared. It may mean the treatment is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. I've seen patients stop medications suddenly. A week later, their pressure rebounds, sometimes higher than before. That's why any medication change should happen with guidance, not guesswork, not social media, Not advice from a neighbor who heard something from a cousin. Real guidance, because your body deserves better than trial and error. And there's one final story I want to leave you with before we continue. A man named Walter, 80 years old, veteran, living in Florida. Walter told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Doc, for years I thought good health meant never needing medicine." Then he smiled, and now I realize good health means understanding the medicine I'm taking. That perspective changed everything, because health isn't about pride, it's about knowledge. It's about understanding what's helping you, what's hurting you, what's changing, and what questions you should be asking. The seniors who thrive aren't always the healthiest when they start. They're often the most informed. They're the people who stay curious, who pay attention, who ask one more question, and who refuse to settle for confusion. Because confusion creates fear, understanding creates confidence, and confidence changes